All right, so welcome to 3 Con Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. And today we're going to talk about Broken Skull Sessions with Chris Jericho. Now, this was very good. This was very good. I enjoyed the hell out of this. To be quite honest, a lot of this stuff is stories that he told on his WWE documentaries. So some of it was a little bit more with details. Like there were certain details that were left out of the WWE documentaries, basically people he didn't want to mention, or maybe they had a ban on mentioning them that popped up. So this video, I took 4 pages of notes. I know sometimes people like to hear how many notes I got. I got 4 pages of notes, and I'm not going to hit all the points. So, because a lot of this stuff, if you go and watch the Chris Jericho documentary, a lot of that stuff is the same. So, this video, I think, is probably going to focus on AEW and why AEW was formed. That's going to be one of the things I'm going to talk about. Also going to talk about some tidbits that he came up with, basically just some little knowledge drops that he came up with that I thought was very interesting. We'll talk a lot about those. That's what I want to spend most of the time on that. And so let's get right into why AEW was formed. So he says that he left WWE because he thought he had the best storyline going into WrestleMania. Oh, what was that? 28 maybe or something like that. What the hell WrestleMania was that? Well, whatever WrestleMania was when he worked with Kevin Owens. And basically he talked about how the original idea as it was pitched to him was going to be Owens, Jericho for the Universal title because Kevin Owens was the Universal Champion. And then somehow Goldberg became a factor. And that meant that they were going to do a Goldberg and Brock because Jericho was leaving. So the plan was to give Jericho the belt. Then Jericho would lose the belt to Brock. And it would be Brock going forward. But then Goldberg showed up. So then they had Brock Goldberg, which of course didn't involve them. So he didn't care. But then they wanted to put the belt on Goldberg to build the match with Brock, which of course it didn't need the belt. It never needed the belt. And so it damaged his match with Kevin Owens. And then he said that him and Kevin Owens was in the second match of the show. And he felt like that was, a slap in the face. That, he's Chris Jericho. He had put all this effort into, the Festival of Friendship and all of that stuff. He had put all of this effort in. And he had even fought with, I'm guessing, Triple H. He says Vince wasn't there. So the people who were running the show, as he said. So either like Kevin Dunn or Triple H or whoever was running, who would have been running Raw at the time. He talked about how, he had to fight to get it the way that he wanted it. And then, they did the Festival of Friendship, which I thought was awesome. It was a great switch, great angle. I wasn't really big on Kevin Owens. I'm still not. I think, I probably call him Bubba Ray Owens. I call him Bam Bam Owens. I didn't call him just about everything. Any fat guy, King Kong Owens. I just called him all kind of stuff. I'm not really a big fan of Kevin Owens, okay? But I like Kevin Owens as a heel. I think as a heel, now his babyface stuff recently has been pretty good within 2021. I don't know when you listen to this. Within he's feuding with Roman Reigns. That was good stuff. But I was a feud of basically hole in the brain Kevin Owens, who just seemed to be mildly, I don't know, slow. Let's put it like that. But I was a big fan of that. I thought that was cool. So his match with Jericho, we got bumped to second. And then not only that, but Vince didn't like the match after it happened because Kevin Owens didn't know how to work heel. Anyway, they had the second match on the show. Jericho was just like, all right, that's it. I'm out of here. So he says that, after he left, he didn't think that he talked to Don Callis, who was Don Callis not only is a former wrestler, he's a former writer for WWE. He actually helped Jericho get into WWE. That was an interesting story too. I enjoyed that story. But he talked about mostly Don Callis is working commentary for New Japan. And he pitched the idea of Jericho doing a New Japan match, which even though I think his contract was over, Jericho pitched, told Vince about it. Like, hey, I'm going to go work in Japan. And Vince thought it was a great idea to go work this one match in Japan and, fly the WWE flag in Japan. And he worked the match with Omega, did big business. And Jericho kind of got slapped in the face, kind of like, hey, I don't have to run anything by anybody. I could just go out there and do whatever I wanted. Also, business was going up. Business had, as far as a streaming service and everything had gone up, kind of found himself in a position where he was a draw. And so he was kind of like, wow, I like this. I like being a draw. So then he says that Vince had this idea that he was going to wrestle in Saudi Arabia against The Undertaker in a casket match. He really wanted to do that because he never really got to work with Undertaker. And then the idea for wrestling Naito came up in New Japan, and he agreed to do that too. And then when Vince found out about Naito, he just was basically kind of got pissy about it. And Jericho was like, oh, it's just one match. And if this second match happens, then it happens. But it ain't got nothing to do with me wrestling in Saudi Arabia. And then Vince replaced him with Rusev. And then Jericho was like, fuck it, I'm out of here. I'm going to New Japan. And that's when he didn't wrestle Naito. I think he wrestled Tanahashi and he wrestled Okada, I believe. He did the Painmaker and all that type of stuff. And then he says, like, from there, basically, he was able to see that he could be the focal point of the show. And then kind of things fell apart with New Japan. And then you had all these ROH guys, Cody, the Young Bucks. All their contracts were coming up. They didn't mention Ring of Honor. I think he did, but not where they were working at the time, which is where they were working in Ring of Honor. Hangman Page, all those guys were working in Ring of Honor. And all of them was planning to do All In. And because they were all planning to leave. And Ring of Honor, of course, didn't know that. So Ring of Honor helps them put on All In. It was a big success. All their contracts go expire, and then Jericho kind of starts talking to Tony Khan about forming AEW. So then he starts talking about all the things that you need in order to run a successful wrestling promotion. That you need to have finances and passion, national TV, and 4 to 6 guys that you can build around. And he says, like, well, if I can be one of them. Then you got Omega, and you got Cody, you got the Young Bucks, and you got Hangman Page. That's 5 or 6 right there. So you got the talent. Tony Khan got the money. He got the passion. He just needed the TV deal. So then he starts talking about, they thought they were going to be on HBO or Showtime or a streaming service or something like that. And then TNT basically just fell in their lap, basically due to Tony Khan's relationship with TNT. And that ended up being a big deal. So it was able to, do this whole thing, this whole AEW thing. And basically he says, like, look, we're 2 different types of wrestling. Like we're competition by proxy because we're both in the field of wrestling, but it's 2 different things. We trying to do our own thing. We're not trying to go after WWE, yada, yada, yada. So that was pretty clear from the beginning. And I think, him saying that I think it was important. It's not going to stop the Maniacs Online. But all wrestling promotions are in competition by proxy. But when WWE basically they make so much money now, they don't care about AEW. Like back when they were struggling, when Vince was putting his house on the line for WrestleMania and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was cutthroat. When he was trying to get rid of those guys, Crockett and Gagne and all that, he's trying to get rid of them guys. But now Vince is sitting so comfortable. All his money is guaranteed pretty much. He doesn't really have to worry about AEW too much. I'm pretty sure he doesn't care at all about Jericho being on this network. And it's something that they talked about that too. Steve Austin says, he had the idea. He pitched the idea to Vince. Vince gave it the big thumbs up. Of course, Tony Khan said it was cool. So that's kind of how this whole thing came together. And he told the story of AEW. And I thought that was very interesting because he was like, okay, I had to do something else, that maybe, and he says, like, I couldn't go back to WWE because if I did, it's going to be doing the greatest hits. I got to put somebody on the list. I got to be Y2J. I got to be doing this. I got to be doing that. And when you think about it, WWE does do that to people. Look at Jeff Hardy, for instance. Jeff Hardy has done 100 different things. When he came back to WWE, he had to go back to being Hardy Boys Jeff Hardy. Still, Matt Hardy, same thing. Matt Hardy had to fight in order to get broken Matt Hardy on WWE television. And then Vince didn't even run with it the way that Matt Hardy wanted it to. It's like, the WWE universe. And everything you do outside of it, you have to create some version of it within the WWE universe. Like MVP and the Hurt Business, which is, of course, their version of the Beatdown Clan, which is what they were doing at TNA. And basically just recycled that idea. And but WWE is real reluctant to use what other people are doing on the outside. So when you do leave and come back, basically you just hit the reset button and you're doing the same thing all over again. Look at John Morrison. He was feuding with The Miz when he left, and that was like 10 years ago. And he came back. He's now back with The Miz. The same thing he was doing just before he left. So I see what Jericho is. I see exactly what he meant by he's saying, like, hey, I didn't want to, be doing the greatest hits. But at the same time, he did admit that, hey, basically it was an ego thing. I saw an opportunity to go out here and be the guy. Something I never really got to do before. I was never the guy. I got to be world champion, got to be main event, got to be a top guy. But I never got to be the guy. And now he's like, oh, I got to put the company on my back for the first 6 months. And I was completely responsible for AEW. It's a completely different responsibility. And that's very interesting too, because he's talking to Stone Cold Steve Austin. Who, the company, the mammoth WWE was sitting on his broken neck for 2 years before The Rock really kind of skyrocketed and took off. But I thought it was a very interesting piece of business that he was talking about when he started talking about the formation of AEW and why he needed to leave. And this wasn't, of course, it wasn't the first time he had left. And the first time he had left, when he was basically for the same reason. He felt burnt out that he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't adding anything to the product. But I think at this point, what was this, 2017 when he left, that he kind of felt like he had done so much and to get put in that spot. And it was interesting that he was kind of saying like, hey, I would have rather gone first than second. Anything except second. I would have gone, they go first, I go last, whatever, but I cannot go second. And that was real. That was real interesting. I really enjoyed that. Like, I really soaked that up. It even more interesting as he talked about his role in AEW. Basically, he says, like, I'm basically like Vince McMahon. Like, there's a line of people outside trying to get advice from me because they'd never worked TV before, and that he used to try to do these team meetings. And I've heard about these team meetings. I remember they used to have them with quote unquote team meetings where he's talked about Pentagon and Phoenix. He basically, I believe, I forget which wrestling website, but it's probably on all of them because they all aggregate. But he basically talked about, trying to help the tag team division, try to help these guys how to work American style tag team matches because people were really brutal on Pentagon and Phoenix for how they just worked lucha in and out, no tags, right? So we know that those team meetings actually occurred and that he was basically leading them. And, Jericho also has done, his podcast. He pretty much leaks stuff all the time. It doesn't matter. But I thought that was very interesting. Let's talk about some of the little nuggets that he dropped in this little document, in this little piece. I don't want to call it a documentary so bad. But one of the things he's talking about is, wanting to change things. That when you change alignments, go to different companies or whatever, you want to do something different. And I'm a big fan of that. Like slight music changes, changes in gear. Like he talked about when he was Y2J, how that had to be different from what he was doing in WCW, and how when he first came in, basically he was doing what he was doing in WCW, and it took some time for him to shake that off, and then he had to build his WWE thing, which was still Y2J, but it was a different take on it. But he, of course, he talked about, cutting his hair from when he left and when he came back, but he was still doing Jericho. He had to kill that whole thing and create the new Chris Jericho with the suits and the short hair based on Nick Bockwinkel and No Country for Old Men, and build that. And I see that a lot in wrestling, and I've kind of been really, that's true, right? When you do something like a major character change, I am fully in favor of you changing your theme song, changing your look, changing even your finish, because he did change his finish too at the time. He changed from the Lion Salt and the Lion Tamer to the Code Breaker. He started doing that, and then when he went to AEW, he started using that back elbow, or the back shoulder, as you might call it, because it's rarely an elbow and it doesn't make any contact. So, but that's an interesting thing because that is so true, and it's very rare to how many people. It's for starters, it's rare WWE would even let you change your character too much, especially that much. But when you turn heel, there needs to be, especially if you're going to be a heel for a long time, for like a stretch, it would make sense for you to change, and I don't see enough of that. I don't see enough people changing fully when they go heel or when they go babyface. Now, some guys do. Like, I think Seth Rollins has changed a little bit. His theme song is mostly the same, And his look is mostly the same. But, certain things have changed. But I think that more guys need to take that advice of changing everything about you when you're done with that previous character, or at least change it as much of it as you can, and not even using the same moves anymore. Do different things. I think Randy Orton had a pretty radical change too, because outside of the RKO, his body type changed, his moveset changed. Everything from when he went from the Legend Killer to the Viper. That's when he started doing the short hair. He was in better shape. His wrestling style actually changed. His approach to things changed. And that's, of course we could talk about the big sweeping changes like what Undertaker did. Undertaker and Jericho made sweeping changes to their look and everything. And that's pretty much what I'm thinking of here is, like I remember vividly the first time I saw Christian with his haircut, and I didn't even recognize him. Like it's an important thing to, when you're done being a thing, when the brood is dead, there's no reason you should still be wearing brood gear, years later. That's kind of like when Marty Jannetty kept being like the rocker. He kept being the rocker everywhere he went. Like he was in ECW as the rocker. He was WCW as the rocker. Same gear, everything. He just never changed anything. Rob Van Dam was another one. Like he never changed anything. Most of the ECW guys refused to change. Rhino and Tommy Dreamer. They were just all the same. Everywhere they went, they just did whatever they was doing in ECW. And I think that limited a lot of them, except Raven. Like Raven was willing to go and change, do different things. Like he changed his look when he went from WCW to ECW, and from ECW to WWE, he changed his look. And then by the time he went on to Independence in the early 2000s, he had gained some weight. He had gotten some new tattoos. He had cut his hair down short. He hadn't gotten, he looked different. Like ECW Raven, Ring of Honor Raven, TNA Raven, they look different, So, and I think that's something that's very important that more people need to pick up on. Another thing that he said that I think is very important, and I think I've kind of been saying this, and I heard Al Snow say the same thing. I was actually going to do a video about just this part. And he says that when you have TV time, that's your opportunity to stand out. And Al Snow basically says that, you as an independent contractor, when you have TV time, that, whatever, block of time that you have, that's a commercial for you and for you to put out there and sell gimmicks, sell who you are. So it doesn't matter if it's 1 minute or 10 minutes, that's your time to go out there and do whatever it is you're going to do and get over. And it's up to you to make it happen. And the Al Snow shoot interviews, when I've seen him say this, like Jericho's probably the most high profile guy I've ever heard say it, but I've heard numerous guys say it. That, once you go out there in front of the cameras, it's all on you. I heard Shawn Michaels say it, so maybe Shawn Michaels might have been the highest ranking guy I've ever heard say something like that. But it's true. Like I looked up once how much money to run a commercial on SmackDown costs, and it costs like $56,000. So when you see like a 30-second commercial on SmackDown, it's $56,000. So that means if you're a wrestler and you have a 5-minute match, that's 30 seconds times how many 30 goes into 5 minutes, how many times, and then 56 goes into that, how many times. You get the numeric event, and then you have to take into account your salary, your opponent's salary, cameraman, all this type of stuff. That's the cost of your segment. It's like when you go into a restaurant, they have to pay for everything that you see, from the billboards to the glass to the plastic spoons and cups and the cartons and everything. And all of that is factored into how much your meal costs, So that's an interesting thing that I think a lot of people do not think about. It's like the economics of the wrestling business. Like when you turn your TV on and you watch wrestling, you're looking at this guy who makes X amount of dollars for maybe per year, but in this particular match, he's going to make X amount of dollars. And then you have to take into account the manpower that it took to put together the set, build the ring, the commentators, the announce table. You had to buy all the materials, You know, like all of this stuff costs money. And it's one thing that's like a completely different mindset. So when you're a person and you're given 10 minutes or whatever on TV, if you can make those 5 or 6 minutes work, then you're a return on investment. This kind of got me thinking because I saw somebody online, and I'm not going to say who it is, but they work for a wrestling website, and all they do is tweet how long the women's matches are. So they go through the women's matches and they see how long the match is with a stopwatch, like literally with a stopwatch, and they will say this women's match was 4 minutes and 47 seconds or whatever. And you would kind of be thinking about it like, I know what the point of that is. Like the point of that is to show, oh, the women don't get enough time, or, they got more time this week or less time this week or whatever. And then you think about like what Jericho said, what Al Snow said, and you're like, man, every minute that you're out there is a commercial for you and your talent, and you're selling yourself, if not to this audience, then to other promoters, because they're watching too. So if you are a guy like Matt Cardona, aka Zack Ryder, and you've been on WWE TV for 10 years, right? Then promoters know who you are and they know what you can do because they've seen you on TV. So even if you're not selling anything to Vince or to me as a consumer, or to any other consumers out there, you may be out there impressing some other promoter somewhere. And that actually loops into what I was talking about Jericho and Tony Khan and having 5 or 6 guys, because you got those guys who they didn't know Jericho was watching them. They didn't know Jericho and Tony Khan and all those guys was watching them when they was out there doing bullshit matches on Ring of Honor. But people were watching. So when an opportunity came, those were the guys that they looked at like, okay, this guy's maximized his time. And none of these guys were like wrestling an hour, well, except Kenny Omega, but Cody wasn't going out there wrestling an hour. The Young Bucks were usually in the first or the second match in New Japan. So these kind of things, they kind of make sense when you really put some thought into them. Like when you sit down and think about it, like those things do make sense. They kind of add up. And yeah, it does cost like $56,000 to run a commercial on SmackDown, probably even more than that. And some of those commercials are like a minute, so that means that's $100,000, over $100,000, for a commercial on SmackDown. That's advertising dollars, So that's what the time on SmackDown is worth. So when somebody says, "Oh, I can't get a minute on SmackDown," are you worth $56,000? 100 and some odd grand, maybe, but obviously the return on investment is not going to be the same. And so, like, the last thing I want to talk about is Jericho seems to still have a pretty good relationship with Vince McMahon, which seems to be a recurring theme, not just with these Smoking Skull sessions, but with various guys who worked there for a long time. They seem to have a really good relationship with Vince, even if it ends less than amicably. It's still a respect there. Like Jericho told this story about being in Vince's house, like when he first got hired, and how he wore a shirt that was, trying to accentuate his muscles, and he tried to seem like he was bigger than he really was. And how he went in there and there was a booking meeting going on, and they were in there booking Raw or something like that. And they started eating lunch, and him and Vince were sitting there eating brownies. That just sounds amazing. Like he was sitting with Vince McMahon eating brownies. And I thought Vince didn't eat. I know that he eats sweets. Like I think I heard Bruce Pritchard talk about it. But for a guy who's like a workout freak, I couldn't imagine him sitting there eating like a whole plate of brownies with Chris Jericho, as this guy is motor mouthing his way through what he can bring to the WWF. And Vince is just kind of like, "We'll let you know, kid," But my favorite story, obviously, is the McMahon 1, Jericho 0. When he said they were texting at like 2 a.m. or something like that, or they was just getting off a plane or something like that. And Vince said he was going to the gym while Jericho goes to sleep. And then, he said he got a text message with Vince flexing after he just left the gym. He says, Jericho, McMahon 1, Jericho 0. So, I mean, I like that, he seems to still have a great deal of appreciation, even though I know he's taken some pock shots here and there since he left. But he seems to still have such a great appreciation and a great relationship because they obviously they do because Vince was okay with him coming on the show. But basically this episode was just a rundown of his career, and that's basically what it was. Is Jericho got to sit and tell the backstory of a lot of his, some of his matches and angles and stuff like that. It was fun. But before I go, there's one more thing I want to say. Jericho is yet another wrestler that I've heard say they got into wrestling because their grandma watched it. That's like number 8. Like I've heard Keith Lee say it. How many other people have I heard say my grandma used to watch wrestling? Shit, I can't think of too many people off the top of my head, but it's been about 10 now that I've heard say I used to watch wrestling with my grandma. I think I need to start keeping like a list of how many wrestlers have said my grandma watched it and therefore I watch it, and then therefore I wanted to do it. It's something about grandmas in wrestling that has gravitated so many people to it. It's crazy. All right, I think everybody should go watch this. It was, of course, brilliant, especially when he started talking about the backstory between his matches with Shawn Michaels and stuff like that, and the Festival of Friendship, and a lot of the other odds and ends like the Millennium Man and stuff like that. It's very interesting stuff. But these are just the things that I felt like are just things I pulled from the piece that I thought was worth talking about. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the description. Go into the description. There will be a Cash App there to send money directly, or put me on the payroll by hitting the subscribe star. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.